Okie dokes, perfect. We should be live, and I will give it a couple of moments just to let everybody join us. So if you can hear me and you can see me, do let me know in the comments, because that's the way that I am aware that I am live. So hello, please do let me know that you can see me and hear me in the comments. If you're watching this on catch up, then please do let me know that you're watching it on replay as well, so that we can know that you are there. So as I said, let me know. I'm going to stay here for a couple of moments just so that I can see. I'm just going to have a look as well and make sure that I am live in the group and that everyone can hear me. And so we'll look to start in about 1 minute. Perfect. Yes, I can see people there. Brilliant. People are there. Okie dokes. Good. I can see hello. Hi. Perfect. Okay. So this is something new that we've decided to do here in the group. And it's where I will take a full run through of a paper. And I will look at how I might tackle it, different ways that I might suggest for students to tackle different questions, and generally run through that paper for you, so you can see how it might be tackled, different ways in which it might be looked at. So if I just make sure, here we are. Before we start, just as a quick FYI, I'm not going to be going over every single question. And that's because there's just not enough time. I've got an hour in which to do this. And really, if I was to go over it in a lot of detail, I would expect to be spending a longer time. What I will be doing is I will be pausing on those questions that I think it's really important to consider, maybe multiple ways of doing a question, ways that you might check, things that maybe a student would fall into making a silly mistake on. To move your child kind of above an 80%, and that's really where I look to focus. I focus on the super selective schools. So for me, this is the area that I'm usually looking at. A student must be able to understand their strengths and their weaknesses. So throughout this live, what I'll be doing is I'll be saying a lot of students typically, or some students typically. That might not be your student. And if that's okay, your student really, really knows that stuff, that's fine. But everyone is individual. It's about getting an idea of where strengths and weaknesses lie. The third is I might make a mistake. And if I do, I apologize. I am human. I unfortunately had to reschedule yesterday's live because I was a little bit ill. So you might hear that a little bit in my voice as well. I would expect students to check their answers. And as much as you know, what I'm sharing today it's kind of come from me and my tutors. It is occasionally we do make something that is a mistake, and that is almost to be expected. So before we start, who am I? A lot of you might know me from the group. So my name is Gemma. I am a tutor. I have around 10 years of tuition experience, and I have a student in almost every one of the top 20 selected schools. I admin here in the group. I'm a group expert. And I founded the Education Hotel Tuition Agency. So that's what I'm most known for. I speak to a lot of publications, a lot of newspapers around education. And I tend to do a lot of lives as well. So people tend to hear quite a bit of me. Hopefully you're not fed up of my voice. And I think this is a new, as I said, a new section for this group, and it's one that we think might be interesting to everyone, and hopefully you'll get some use out of it. So before we go on, I do want to just say thank you to Deep and Mitu for allowing me to go live in private and grammar school information group. It's always an absolute pleasure to go live and to be able to speak with all of you guys. And I really do thank them for giving me that opportunity. So thank you very much, guys. Okay, so we will be tackling a Merchant Taylor's math paper. And really what I've done is I pop the questions over on one side and I've put some answers over on the other. So really this next kind of, what are we on, so 50 minutes, is going to be just me going through these papers. So if you have a child and that child is yet to take this paper, this would be the point at which I would disappear, take that paper, and then come back and have a look at this live, because otherwise you're going to be watching me having done this paper. And actually, it would probably be better for you to go away and have a look at it. If you are a parent and you're looking at alternative ways to help your child to really boost their marks, then this is definitely still hang around. But if you do go away and come back, let me know. Let me know by putting #replay in those comments. So, as I said, fairly kind of straightforward run through. If you do notice something that you like to do differently, please do put it down in the comments. That is how we learn. We learn through other people's ways of doing things. Hopefully you will learn something through the way that I do things. So first one should be fairly easy. Names of shapes. It's something that you need to remember. Second one, there is a temptation in this second question to try and put everything into an equivalent fraction. It takes more time than turning them all to decimals. So in terms of what I would be doing, I'd be turning everything into decimals, because I know that 44% is 0.44. I've already got the 43. I know that 2/5, I can turn 2/5 into 4/10, 4/10 into a decimal. That gives me 0.4. The only tricky one is that 3 out of 7. Now, 3 out of 7 is hard to turn into an equivalent fraction. So the easiest way for me is to do 3 and divide it by 7. Now, I don't need to do as many decimal places, because remember that this is about order of size. So I only need to get to the point of 0.42, and then I know where it goes, because I know that there's a 0.43 and I know that there's a 0.40. So once I found that place, there's no point doing all of the division, because that's wasting time. What we're going to do is we're going to do it to the point that we know where it needs to go, and then we can order it. Now, if you had time to check, definitely go back, put them into equivalent fractions. So 43 over 100, 44 over 100, 2 out of 5, you can scale up to 40 over 100. And then the 3 over 7, that's the tricky one. So you might see, okay, well, can I turn everything to 700 and do the 3 over 7 into 700s as well? But I would do that as a check. I wouldn't choose to do that right at the start, because that tends to take time. Again, it's up to your child and what they're quickest at. So if they're really, really good at timesing up by 7 and making sure that they've got large scale multiplication, then maybe that is a quicker way for them. But ultimately, we're looking at speed and we're looking at accuracy when it comes to this. And for me, only doing one step, turning them all to decimals, is quicker and more accurate. The next question is on sequences. And so for sequences, we're always looking for a common difference, but do always check to the end. I see a lot of students around this time, lots and lots of them preparing for year 5, and they're in year 5, they're preparing for 11 plus this September, and lots of them are really used to doing these types of questions and almost forget that there's maybe something there to just slightly different, maybe to catch them out. So do always work to the end. The first one's a common difference, the second one's a common difference, but that third one, that's not a common difference. So if you check, you'll find that for C, so 3C, you've got a difference of +7, you've got a difference of +19. And that should have you thinking, oh, wait, that's different. That's not a common difference. I need to be looking at. And so for my students, when they're looking through, when we're looking through sequences, we go for common difference first. But if it's not, multiplication, square, cube, Fibonacci, different types of sequences, is 1 over. That's what I've got them thinking. So I'm looking at how do they do it. And this one here is a cube. It's a cubed sequence. So we've got 1 to the power of 3, 2 to the power of 3, 3 to the power of 3, 4 to the power of 3. So it's about recognition. So don't just rely on that first gap and assume it's the same the whole way through. That fourth one as well is just a tad tricky. And again, a lot of these questions, this is an exam paper that is open marks, so you have to write down your working, but this could easily come up in a multiple choice. A lot of these are multiple choice overlaps. So if you're watching this and thinking, oh, but my child's doing a multiple choice paper, then this is still worthwhile in terms of seeing. So for the next one, the rearrangement so that the resulting number is closest to 5,000, don't forget it's not necessarily below, it could be above. So the closest could be above 5,000 or it could be below 5,000. So I've realized now I've actually done 6,000. So I've made a silly error there. So I've put the two that are closest to 6,000. So I've just picked up my mistake. As I said, I did know that I'd make one at some point. So with this, you want to organize your numbers. So here we'd be looking at 4,000. So closest to 4,000 is above 4,000. So make sure that you are reading that question properly. This one should be a fairly simple probability. There isn't anything that I thought was important to mention on this. The next one, we're looking at really knowing your vocabulary. So knowing what perpendicular, knowing what parallel, knowing what obtuse, knowing what acute means, each of those kind of familiarity. So really do make sure that you are familiar with those. The lampposts question, and I know that anyone who is taught by me or has indeed done any of my summer courses or any of my holiday courses knows that this is one of my favorite questions. So the idea is that you've got 4 lampposts, they're all spread out, and they want to know the distance from the first one all the way until the last one. If you draw it out, it becomes very obvious to notice, wait, there's 4 posts, but there's 3 gaps. But if you're rushing, because this is at the start of the paper and you're rushing through it, you won't notice it. What you'll do is 25 times 4, that's 100. Okay, I'm going to stick that down next. But if you just take time to draw out those posts, note the gaps, then it becomes very obvious that actually you're only needing to do that 3 times. Okay. The next one, again, because this is early on in the paper, typically we tend to get some slightly easier ones. So we're looking at factors, prime factors, highest common factors. Do make sure when they've asked you to write down all the factors of 36, they've not asked for prime factors. They've just asked for factors. So do make sure that. Highest common factor, lowest common multiples should be something that your child is familiar with. Next is a data analysis. And so for this data analysis, again, there's a little bit of wording. A lot of this is about properly reading the words. And this is why, even if you're doing multiple choice and you're only doing grammar school exams, I would really recommend looking at the independent schools, because often their wording is a little bit trickier. And so it makes students really, really think. So here, they would like to know which number was chosen most frequently. And if you look at that graph, you can see that the highest frequency is 8. So I get a lot of students who'd write down 8. And that's not what the question is asking. They would like to know the number that is chosen most frequent, not the frequency. So do make sure that you're reading those questions really, really a lot. In terms of knowing how many pupils there were in the class, they're wanting you just simply to add up the frequencies. But this is typically where you'll see a silly mistake. And so I'm just going to take a slight pause on this, because this is probably the first one that I think is important to pause on. As parents, you will notice your child making silly mistakes across papers. Regardless of the papers that they do, there'll typically be a number of silly errors. And when a student makes a silly mistake, it's either that they're rushing it, or that they think it's really easy, or that they've just put an answer down. But typically it's due to moving a little bit too quickly. So one of the things that I like to focus on is speed, but also accuracy. They've got to come hand in hand. And so it's about recognizing, okay, this is a question I typically will make a silly mistake on. And I know this personally. So this is why I've written down it's typically a silly mistake, because this is where my students typically will make a silly mistake. And the reason for that is you've got a lot of numbers that you need to add up. And you can make an error in lots of different parts of it. And it's a really quite a simple addition. So you're tempted to rush it. So what I always do with my students is to make sure that A, they need to recognize this is where they make silly errors. B, they then need to have a different way of adding up. So we might add it straight using column addition. That's fine. But typically a kind of common error is that you'd forget to carry a certain amount, or you're rushing through it. You don't necessarily capture every single number from that graph. So we do it once more. And we don't do the same, not the same sum, because our minds switch off when we do the same thing. So instead, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we go over it, but in a different way. So when we're looking through it again, we might, instead of just going along and writing the numbers down and adding via column, what I'll do is I'll say, right, let's put a number on top of each of those frequency bars. So we'll write on top of them. I'll write a 2 on top of the first one. I'll write a 4 on top of the second one. And that will make sure that we're using a slightly different method, a slightly different way of working out. And it stops our brain from turning off. And then another way that I would use to increase the way of to increase the accuracy is, instead of doing column addition, we'll do a different type of addition. I do something called number pairs, which is where you say, oh, look, there's an 8 in there. 8 plus 2 gives me 10. Tally the 10. And then I'm going to add the 2 4s together. That gives me another 8 plus the 2, tally the 10. So I'm making a tally chart as opposed to doing a traditional addition. So that way, I'm doing it a slightly different way. And that means that instead of making that error and then doing the repeat and making the same error, because you can see it on the page, then you're doing it a slightly different method. And that means that your brain is more awake and you're doing it again. So when your child makes these silly errors, instead of saying to them, this is where it's gone wrong, ask them to go through 5 or 10 different questions. Now, some of those they may have made silly errors in, and some of them they haven't. But they need to do it in a different method. If they use a different method, they're more likely to be able to see that mistake. So always never tell them exactly where it is, but always make them go back and redo it, but in a different way. Okay. Next one is rounding. And again, rounding, often you'll make a silly mistake because you're rushing, but really that is a matter of checking it, going back, reading the question. And then we're into a little bit of a statistical question. So this one, I will always put RTQ. RTQ kind of goes all the way from GCSE. So I've kind of stolen a little bit of that language. It means read the question. Read the question really carefully, because otherwise you're going to miss these marks. And they're easy enough marks, but those 3 marks are really easy to get wrong, because they're not asking you for numbers. And in a math paper, we just want to write down numbers. You've got it in your head that this is what the mark is. It's about numbers. So the question here is about which player, who scores the most goals, not the number of goals, who. So you need to be writing down the player's name. You can't write down the number of goals, you'll get it wrong. Which league did they play in? Again, not the number of goals, not the name of the player, but the league. And then the third one is a bit of an odd wording. So which league had the most goals scored in it by these players? And these players seems a bit confusing. But if you go all the way back, you will see that there are players and that they are in 3 different leagues. And those 3 leagues are what are mentioned in the question. And so what you need to do there is add up the goals scored by each league. And again, they're asking for which league had the most number of goals. They're not asking the number of goals. So try and make sure that that when you're doing that, you maybe underline, and I'd like to underline that keyword so that we can tell that these are the bits that we need to pay attention to. We're looking for words for this answer, not numbers. The number 12 is a hidden algebra question. And often I can spot a hidden algebra question because the names are alphabetical. Here I've got Ali, Beth, and Carl, A, B, C. I can tell often that that is going to be a hidden algebra question. If I get a J, K, L, then again, I'm thinking, oh, maybe this is algebra. Again, it's about writing this out. And again, whether you're looking at this in multiple choice or whether you're looking at these skills when you're doing a written paper, so usually an independent schools paper, it is useful to write down each step. And I like students to get into the habit of writing down, not necessarily every step, it slows the paper down sometimes, but the ones that you know you're going to go back and check, was useful having those marks written down. So making sure that they are written down in the question paper, not in the mark sheet, especially if it's a multiple choice, because you've got to keep that really, really clean so that they can be read. But if you write down A equals 6B, because Ali has 6 times as much as Beth, then you can go back and you can check over it quicker. So writing it down saves future you when you have to go back, because you're not doing the same question again. Instead, you're just checking your working. So here we've got Ali has 6 times as much chocolate as Beth, so A should be 6B. Carl has twice as much chocolate as Beth, so Carl is 2B. And then if Carl has 200, then we should be able to work out how much B is, because C equals 2B. And therefore, we should be able to work out how much A has. So again, really about writing this down and about taking it step by step and writing those steps down so that when you come back to check it, because checking is how we improve those marks, then making sure that you've got those bits written down so you can go back and read them. Okay, number 13 is a multi-step question, but it's also a question where students panic because we've got something that looks like you have to find the area of a weird triangle. And I get a lot of students, because typically I'll put students through this around now, maybe slightly earlier. I get a lot of students who do 2 centimeters times by 3 centimeters, because they can see the base, and the base is 2, and they can see the height, and the height is 3. But here, what they're looking for you to do is to really have a think about, how do I get that unshaded region? You get the big triangle and you take away the small triangle. So we're not trying to find the area of that triangle its own. It's about recognizing, oh, okay, they want me to do more than one thing. They're really wanting me. And for those of you who are doing independent schools, look at the marks. There's 2 marks there. 2 marks means usually you've got to do more than one thing. So 2 marks tells me find the area of the big triangle, find the area of the small triangle, minus those 2. The 5% of 24 should be fairly standard, but you've got 2 different ways of which you might want to write it out. So again, it depends on your child's strengths and how they tackle a paper. So for some of my students, 24, 10%, 2.4, we've moved the decimal place back, 5% is half of 2.4, 1.2. So that is one way of doing it. Or you could go, well, 1% is 0.24, and therefore 5% is 5 lots of 0.24. They come to the same answer, but think about what is quicker, and think about which one you could use to be checking, because it's a different way of working it out. So if you can use multiple methods, then even if the first one you got stuck halfway along, you were trying to work it out, you can't remember how to do it, you can switch over to that second method. So we're not working on memorizing something. We're not working on only one way, but what we're working on is how can we improve the speed for that student? So is it that you are better at finding 10%, moving the decimal place, halving it? Or is it that actually for you finding 1% and then timesing up is better? So all about trying to work out what's the speediest way and what's the best way that you can check. Okay. For number 15, anyone who's struggling with negative numbers, think about a ladder, going up and down below ice, where ice is at the 0. Occasionally, students who struggle with negatives, and this might be more of a year 4 kind of question, but you often forget to put the 0. So for me, when I explain it to students, I use that ice and I say that ice is 0. It means you have to count the ice as you're going up and down. Sometimes they miss it out. B is a little bit tricky if your child doesn't know what the word overdrawn means. Now, it says here, Raj is overdrawn at the bank by £40. And I know that many students will understand overdrawn, but some might not, especially if English isn't your first language, or it's a subject that your child hasn't necessarily come across. So for that, really, there's a little bit of a hint in that, and this comes along with a lot of independent schools, is that we've got an A and a B. An A is all about negative numbers. So B is likely, not always, but likely to be related to that. So I can see, okay, even if I don't know what overdrawn means, I'm probably looking at negative. So I'm thinking negative 40. But useful piece of terminology, if your child is unfamiliar with the word overdrawn, maybe that's something that's worth speaking with them about. Number 16 is an algebra. Okay, and with the algebra, what I like to do is I like to circle each term, but every term has to have a sign. So we can't just circle the 3q on its own. It has to be plus 3q. You can't circle 7q on its own. It has to be plus 7q. So I like to circle them, and occasionally I will circle them and then I'll draw lines together. So this one goes with this one, this one goes with this one. I've got plus 3q and plus 7q, and they come together to give me plus 10q. And that helps. A, you wouldn't need it quite so much, but B, you really do, because you've got negative numbers. And that really helps when we get to negative numbers, because we've got plus 10b, but minus 14b. Now, if you forgot the sign, you'd get 10b, 14b. You immediately put those two together and you think it's an add. But if you've circled it, and it's part of being really thoughtful with the way that you're working something out, if you're taking the time to circle it, again, your brain is connecting those dots. It's saying, right, I need to really remember that there is a negative in this. And so that's often why I get my students to draw. As I said before, drawing something out, I talk about it a couple of times throughout here. Circling things, underlining. It's all about trying to get that student to recognize, right, this is an important piece. Now, I'm not saying to underline the whole paper, definitely. But what I am saying is to make sure that those key things that typically they'll get wrong, and typically it's a sign change, that's something that I would expect them to be underlining, circling, drawing. Often when I go through a student's paper, and these are students who are, aiming for really super selective schools, so places like QE, Henrietta Barnett, St Paul's, we're looking at kind of HABs, top level schools. And if we go through their papers, you'll find that there's all sorts of working. There's little drawings, there's little notes. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't necessarily help us to work it out. But what it is a student is thinking, and they're thinking and they're noting down little tiny bits. And if I see a paper that's completely empty, then I'm starting to worry about that student. If I see a student that's written down tiny little bits, I see, okay, as they're going through, they're really thinking about this. They're really, really thinking about it. And actually what they're doing is they're leaving clues for themselves when they come back and they check. And that's where they're gaining the marks. It isn't necessarily that their answers are different. It's that when they're coming back and they're checking, they can see there's a difference. So as I said previously, I noticed, I think on the 4th question here, I made a mistake. I didn't underline. I'm not underlining my key terms, and I should be underlining my key terms. Because if I'm underlining, then I'm spotting those key words that I should be working on. So if your child's not underlining, they're not necessarily sketching something out or drawing out their working, make sure they watch this. yeah, so that they can understand why it's so important, because it's actually speeding their work up. They might not think it because they think it takes time to be able to write stuff down, but actually it helps when you're coming back to look over it. Okay. Again, this one is, it's all about wording. This is why I recommend some of the independent papers, because their wording is just a little bit more complex than some of the multiple choice. So here they're saying, write down an expression. That does not mean solve. That means write down an expression. But if you're a student who's unfamiliar with the way that is worded, then you're going to panic. So make sure that you're aware of what that means. Again, you see that I've written things in brackets. I'm writing them out because I need to be careful of the signs. I've recognized, oh, there is a negative in there. So there's a -9. I need to be really careful. I need to be really careful because I'm doing 3n minus 9 plus 3n minus 9. And so to check, I've come up with another check. If I double 3n minus 9, I get 6n minus 18. And I want to make sure if I combine those two, have I got the same as my first way of working out? So looking at different ways, if I'm working out the first way, can I check it using the second? And is that going to take me long? No, because I've already got the answer. I'm trying to see, does my second way of working it out, does that match my original answer? And it should do. But it's, again, another way of just making sure that I can see it. Okay. Pie chart. In pie chart, we need to read the question, because again, it can be a very easy thing to read and think, oh no, they're going to want me to work out orange and yellow, and oh, I'm doing a pie chart and maybe I need to do 360 degrees and I need to split this. No, you don't need to do any of that. What you need to do is read those questions before you start to panic, before you start to look at everything. So 30 pupils chose red, 25% is a quarter, which is 30. So for my students, that would be 4 lots of a quarter, and that therefore is 4 lots of 30. You might do it a slightly different way, but that's the way that I would do it. So 25%, 1 quarter, 30, 4 lots of quarters is a whole, so 30 times 4. And then looking ahead, how many pupils chose green or blue? You don't need to work out green on its own. You don't need to work out blue on its own. You just need to recognize, oh, that makes a half. Okay, so that's 2 lots of 4, so 30 times 2, or half of my original answer. So I'm looking at different ways that I can read this. So I'm trying to speed myself up. There's no point me working out green and blue. And in fact, I can't. It would just slow me down trying to work out how I could do that. So instead, I'm looking at, okay, they want me green and blue. Okay, I can understand that that is a half. Number 19 is a multi-step question, which for a lot of students that we see, especially over summer, that often means there's going to be a silly mistake because, again, you're doing lots and lots of addition. So make sure that the decimal points are all lined up. You see one of them isn't there for me. It's got a slight movement. That would be confusing. I want to make sure they're lined up underneath each other. I want to make sure that I carry. I want to make sure that I sum it correctly. I want to make sure as well that I don't miss the second part of the question, because it's not about how much did all of the stuff that Jeff bought, how much did that cost? It's about how much change did he get from a £20 note. So you're looking at just adding and then taking it away from £20. So there's quite a lot going on with that question. First of all, you've got to change the 76p into 0.76 because that's the pence, so that we can add it up. Second thing we've got to do is add them correctly together. And again, you can look at using number pairs. You can look at doing 2 of them added together and then summing the total. It depends on whether you've got the time to check. And then the third thing that you've got to do is take that away from £20. So lots of different steps, lots of places to make those silly mistakes, which means that if you know that is an area that you typically make those silly mistakes, you've got to focus, got to therefore spend just a couple more seconds checking. Okay, does this make sense? So if you'd added up, Jeff goes to the cinema, he spends £5, £1.50, 5.75, 1.50, 76p, £3.80. If I'd got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, if I'd ended up with something like £19, that's way off. That's like really, really far off, because really I'm looking at, if I round, estimate, I'm looking at about £6 for the ticket. Even if I go up, £2 for the popcorn gives me 8, £1 for the drink, 9, £3.80, that's another 4. If I got 13, that's too high. So if I'm getting 19, something's gone really wrong. So you really want to be sense checking those. Sense checking them, because that's where the silly mistakes happen. A little bit algebra down in the 20s. And again, for those of you parents who are preparing for multiple choice questions, these algebra questions are really quite tricky. They're using skills and maybe advanced algebra that some of your students might not have seen. And this is, again, it's why if you're going for a super selective grammar, I really recommend looking at the independent school papers, because something like this you wouldn't often find in practice papers. This is an 11 plus exam. It's a Merchant Taylor's 11 plus math paper. But because Merchant Taylor's is independent, you see a slightly different style of question. So really with these, I don't tend to see them often in the practice papers for multiple choice, but I do tend to see them quite a bit in the independents. I like to prepare my students to be above where they need to be. And that's why I always am going kind of that next stage above, because if they can tackle these types of questions, then that is going to help them when they go into that multiple choice. So here we've got a little bit of algebra, bit of rearrangement, being careful of the signs, multiplying out that bracket in C. That's where they're hoping to catch you out. And sometimes when I'm talking to my students, this is the language that I'm using with them. I'm saying, oh, that question is trying to catch you out. It's a little bit like a competition. Can you see where the examiner is trying to trick you? And I like to think of it like that. It's a bit like a game of cat and mouse, because that makes a student often more confident when they see that type of question. They say, oh, I know exactly the common mistake that's made there. I know exactly what everyone else is going to do. Everyone else is going to times that out, and they're not going to think about -2 times -3. Minus times a minus is a plus. When I describe minus and minus, you will see I use my hands. I go minus times a minus is a plus. And that is something that we look at, because again, we're looking at these kind of reminders to our brain. So if you see me do that with my hands, that's why. So here, again, making sure that your child's aware, that's where they're planning on catching me out. And the next one's a kind of a similar one. I see a lot of questions looking for consecutive primes. This question does not say consecutive prime. Consecutive is one next to each other. Here, they're saying different primes. And interestingly, I see a lot of students who are trying to get consecutive primes. And actually, that isn't what the question is asking at all. So again, we're looking, right, where are they trying to catch us out? Where is it that I need to be careful of? What words am I underlining? So here it is, so two different odd prime numbers. Well, if you write out the prime numbers, you'll notice that with the exception of 2, it is odd. So we'll have to get rid of the 2 when we write out those odd prime numbers. We can write out the squares, and then you can look at, okay, which ones do I add together? Remembering, you don't have to be adding the 2 next to each other. They did not say consecutive, so don't fall into that trap. And often thinking about it like that can help a student to try and really make sure that they're doing the exact thing that's asked of them. Okay. Number 22 is another read the question, RTQ. And actually, this is a little bit of a logic question. I quite like this. So this is a little bit like a logic that may even come up in some types of spatial awareness, non-verbal reasoning kind of questions. So we've got Anna has 3 brothers, 5 sisters. Her brother Tom, underline, has S sisters and B brothers. What is the value of S times B? Well, if I can draw out Anna, and I would draw as a little stick person, not just as a line, but that's fine. I can draw out Anna. I can draw out her brother Tom. I can draw out her other brothers. And I can draw out her sisters. And then I can block Tom up and count up all the rest. And that makes it a lot simpler for me to be able to do. But note, they're not looking at how many siblings. Again, they're trying to catch us out with the language. So once you've gone through drawing them out, plucking them off, going around, you might go and count up the siblings, put down the sibling number. But that's where they're trying to catch you out, because they wanted the value of S times B. So hopefully you've underlined it, made sure that that is the thing that you're looking for. So again, oh, I really like this next question. I really do like it. This is one of my favorites, actually. So this looks like a really horrible question. And as you've seen before, I write RTQ, I'll write all sorts of things all over it. And this is one where I write the word time sink. Because if you do it wrong, that's going to take ages. I'm going to do all of that log multiplication over and over and over and over again. You're going to make a mistake, probably, because you've got lines and lines of multiplication there. But you don't need to. You don't need to have it. Instead, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you've really read and understood the question. They only want the remainder when that is divided by 5. So you don't need all of the multiplication. You just need the end part. The end part is 9 times 7. Right? 9 sevens is 63, which means I know that this whole long sum ends in a 3. And that's actually all I need to know. I don't need to do the whole multiplication. If I do, I'm guaranteed that I'm going to be wasting time on it. Massive time sink. I actually only need to know that the last number is 3. If I know that the last number is 3, members of the 5 times table, we go 5, 10, 15, 20. We've either got a 5 or we've got a 0. Well, we haven't got a 5 or a 0, we've got a 3. So that must mean that it should have ended in 0, but we've got a remainder of 3. And that is how we can take a really, really long time sink question and succinct it. But if your child struggles to be able to work out that, and it is something that is fairly tricky, that recognition, that's why practice is important. But if they're not, that might be a question where if it's a multiple choice, I would say to them, put a letter down, circle it, move on, come back. Because if they spend a whole load of time doing this question, they're going to miss out on, I think, almost 10 questions that come after. And if we take on that question here in an independent paper is 2 marks, in a multiple choice it would be 1. You have just missed out a whole third of that paper because you spent all your time doing that one question. Actually, what you need to do is move on. And this is, again, is part of recognition. It's part of being able to be mature enough and be aware enough to say, right, this is taking me too long. I've got to move on. Absolutely have to move on with my time, because otherwise I'm going to spend the rest of my time on this. And there are questions that are easier on the paper. Okay. So next one, we're looking at fractions between. And here again, there's kind of 2 ways that you can do it. The first is to say, well, halfway between 3 and 4 is 3.5. So it's 3.5 over 7. But 3.5 over 7 isn't a fraction. So either you double it and go, oh, okay, that's 7 over 14. That's a half. Or recognize that 3.7 is half of 7. So hopefully that makes sense. So find the fraction. Think of it like a number line. 3 over here, 4 over here. What's in the middle? 3.5. 3.5 over 7. But 3.5 over 7 isn't a fraction, so I either double it or recognize that 3.5 is actually half of 7. Again, 25, multi-step question. I've got £50,000, £50 notes. For me, instead of doing that division as a long division, I prefer to do it as a fraction and cancel because it makes it a lot easier to see. So if you write 50,000 at the top and 50 at the bottom, and then you go, oh, there's a common factor of 50, cross out, put the 1, I've suddenly divided it. I don't need to do long division. Long division, for a lot of students, takes a lot of time. So consider whether you could use a fraction instead to do your long division. Then we've got 1.3 kilograms, which we can turn into grams, move that decimal point 3 times, and then we can divide through. So again, you're looking at ways that you can speed up. All of it is about time technique. So instead of kind of jumping, you want to make sure that you're doing it still systematically. You've got to come back and check it. You've got to make sure that it's accurate. But you've got to try and think about quicker ways to work this through. Often your child can know easily what they're doing, but they don't necessarily do it quick enough. And that's where some of this speed stuff comes in. All right, we've got an identification of a triangle, isosceles. I would check the spelling of that isosceles. As I said, I've written it down, but I'm not certain it's correct. I would actually check. And then the angles, again, it's reliant off of knowing, right, isosceles means there must be 2 equal angles and being able to split those angles. Not a particularly tricky question, especially if you know your triangles and your angles, but one that requires a little bit of thought. Now, remember a couple of questions ago, we talked about that big, long multiplication. And I said, oh, that's a time sink. There's easier questions. Here's an easier question. You get 2 marks, the same amount as what that question in the multiplication was for filling out a table. That filling out a table is just for counting. It's easy if you've got the time. But for child's rushing, they're going to make silly mistakes. So you need to know, when can you speed up? When can you slow down? When do you spend the time on this? This is an easy 2 marks. Really easy 2 marks. It's literally counting. But if you're doing this with 2 minutes to spare, you're going to make the mistake. And you're going to be doing it with 2 minutes to spare because you've spent too long on a time sink question before. That's why you really need to know that paper. In terms of timing, one of the best things that I do with my students, and it's something that we do in our summer camps, it's something that we do in our one-to-ones, we talk about splitting the paper. So don't considering it as just 1 whole hour, but where should you be at the halfway point? You should be more than halfway. Just a clue on that one. Where should you be 10 minutes before the end? Well, ideally, you'd be finished. You'd be checking. You'd also be checking specific ones that you've already marked and you know you're going back to. And you should have written out the working so it's easier. So really think about, where do you need to be in terms of timing? Again, underneath there's a little probability. And again, if you've filled out that table, the probability can be quite easy. So actually you're looking at not just 2 marks, you're looking at 6 marks there. 2 for filling out the table. And then they're looking at, just choosing one shape at random. And is it a black square out of however many there are? So there's 18 shapes. So we should be looking at a table that adds up to 18. And it is really a reading off the table. So what is the black square number over 18? That should be easy if you've got the time. So don't let those 6 marks go because you're so tunnel visioned on getting the 2 marks beforehand, because that's a shame. Next one here is a plotting of coordinates. And again, it's something where we would say it's maybe an easier question. It's a question that a lot of students would find simpler in terms of plotting. Again, if you're struggling with your plotting and you can't remember along the corridor up the stairs, then draw it. So again, with some of my students, if they struggle to remember and they're still doing kind of up and along, what I say to them is, once you open your paper, straight away, you're going to draw me along the corridor up the stairs. And you're going to draw it as a little man, and you're going to draw an arrow going along, and then you're going to draw some little stairs. And then when you come to this question, you're going to go back to the top of your book and you're going to read it. And usually it's just that simple visual image, they'll remember it. But if they haven't written it down, they'll forget. So it's the first thing that some of my students do. They turn over the page, they go along and up. Okay, along and up. Now I can look at the rest of the paper. They won't go back to it until they come to that question. And then they'll go back, they'll read it, they'll usually get the correct marks. So just tiny little tips. That's what I'm saying. Tiny things can make a big difference in terms of exam technique. Okay. And again, right, I feel like often when I go through these papers, I talk a similar thing each time. So here we've got, again, quite a long, wordy question. It's got 3 marks on it. But once you draw it out, it can become a lot easier. So we've got 3 bags, and I would draw 3 little bags, and they've each got oats. And then we've got 1 bag, and that 1 bag's got 20% of wheat and 80% of oats. And it says here, all the bags have the same volume. Now, whenever I'm talking about everything having the same, I'm typically trying to assign it 100, 1,000, looking at it that way. So I'm going to assume each of them have 100 grams. So my 3 bags, underneath each of them, I would write 100, 100, 100. I can add those up. That's 300 grams of oats. My bag that has 20% wheat has 20 grams of wheat, and 80% of oats, 80 grams of oats. And then all I do, add it up and put it as a percentage. So I've got 20 grams over the whole 400, which I can cancel down. Divide through by 4, that gives me 5 over 10, or 5%. And they've asked it for it in percentage. I can see that, and I can see that they've written a percentage sign, so that tells me I know what I'm doing. The same thing happens for number 30. Number 30, if I can draw my glass with the water, put it down as 400, draw my glass with half water. I don't have to be a great artist, and I'm not spending a long time on these. But what I am doing is, again, I'm helping myself when I check. Because if I didn't write anything down for these questions, I'm going to have to do the whole thing again. But if I've got those little diagrams, right, glass and water, glass and half a water. Oh, look, I can see there's half a water difference. Half a water must give me the difference between them. That's 80. And therefore, the full water must be 160. And therefore, I can find the glass. Oh, okay. I can see very clearly with my diagrams, full water, half water. That must mean that the half water taken away equals 80. I can see that very, very clearly. I'm not going to spend very long checking my answer. But if I was coming back to it and I was slightly uncertain, I might have to do the whole question again. And that is going to take longer than simply checking my drawings. Oh, yeah, that's fine. All right, so we're on to number 31. Perfect. Okay. Should be almost there. So here, there's a typical thing that students do. This was quite a while ago, so they'd be likely to change a lot of the wording. But if a student was to see this, it says macaroon 5. Oh, look. Oh, maroon 5. It happens when they see their name, when they see the name of their friends, when they see the date. All of this. Oh, look. Oh, there's my name. That's spending time. Don't need that time. That time is wasted. Can't get that back. So numbers is really what this is about. Not, oh, here's my favorite band. Oh, here's my first person that I know. Here's my best friend's name. None of that. We're just focusing on the math. Kind of tricky question though. Looking at means. So if the mean, the average is 18, then if there's 5 of them, 5 members, then we know that 18 times 5 was the total. So our new total age is 114. Sorry, our total age is 18 times by 5. We know that there's a new member. They come in. There's 6 now, 6 members. And again, I would probably draw it out as people. And I get, okay, right. So there's now 18 times by 5 plus that 24, which is 114, Mean age, I must remember to divide it by 6. Now, if I've drawn out the band, 5 stick men plus a 6th one, that's easy. Jogs my memory that there's 6. Perfect. Okay, now I've got it. But if you don't draw it out, you'll divide it by 5. And then 114 doesn't divide very well by 5. So you're going to end up with remainders, or you're going to end up with decimals. You spend ages looking at the decimals, and actually you didn't need to. So you need to make sure that your child is writing down these kind of notes. And people said, can a child draw like this on the actual exam sheet? The exam sheet, yes, if they're looking at a multiple choice, not on the answer sheet, not on the sheet that they write there, they color the little boxes in. That's a no. If they're doing independent, yes, 100%. In fact, it's what people are looking for in the independent exam. In fact, anything that has a multiple marks, so here 2 marks, if you made a simple numeracy error at the end, but they could see that you got to 114, you were dividing it by 6, they'll give you the first mark. So being able to write down your working can be a big help, and it helps you on the way back. Same thing kind of in B. I'm aware that I'm slightly overrunning, so I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. So we've got a mode, most common. There's 4 numbers. There's got to be 2 9s because otherwise they're not a mode. If we know the mean is 7, 7 times 4 must give us 28. Everything must add to give us 28. There's 2 9s though, so there's 18. 28 minus 18 gives me 10. 10 is the remainder of the 2 numbers. They must add together. If the median is 8, then one of the other numbers has to be 7, because between 7 and 9 is 8. That's the middle number. So I know I've got 9, 9, 7, something. Well, 7 plus something gives me 10. That one must be 3. Again, slightly trickier than we'd normally see on a multiple choice. The same thing kind of appears with the mean weight as well. I'm going to start speeding through. Next one's a triangle. Those of you who've prepared for nonverbal reasoning will be familiar with these. This is a math paper. This is an independent math. So for parents who have stayed away from nonverbal because you know that your child is only doing a math and an English, if they're doing it in an independent school, this can come up. So just beware. My students have a way of working it out for T shapes and for Z shapes and for different types of shapes of cubes. Your child might work it out differently. Grid of hexagons in a reflection typically is about counting the hexagons across. And then number 34 is about looking at perimeters and areas. So you've got to know the area formula. You've got to know the perimeter formula. But you also have to be able to kind of do quite a lot of this multi-step again. So if you've got the area of a square which has sides of 70, for me, I do 2 lots of 7 gives 49 plus the 2 zeros gives 4900. Some people might choose to do 70 times by 70 as long multiplication. For me, that takes too long. Instead, I'm going to take the zeros off, 7 times 7, put the zeros back on. But different people do it different ways. Then we divide through by 50 because you've got the same area as the square, so divide through by 50. Again, instead of doing 4900 divided through by 50 long division, I like to cancel. So cancel, put them as fractions, cancel the 2 zeros. 490 divided by 5 is much quicker than doing 4,900 divided by 50. And then final thing, make sure it's underlined, calculate the perimeter. They did not ask what the other side is. They asked for the perimeter. Don't lose it at the last moment. Next. Okay. I think, yes, we've got 2 more. And these are the 2 kind of tricky ones. So typically we'd say that these are beyond what a student would cover on a multiple choice. I still think it's worth going through, especially with those students going for the really, really selective schools. We've got a bag that's got 49 balls that are red and 1 ball that is blue. They're looking at how many red balls should be removed so that the bag contains 90% red balls. Now, if you're thinking about this logically, you might go, okay, well, the first one is 49 over 50. Okay, I might do 49 over 50. I might do that long division. I might work out that that's 98% in terms of red balls. And then I might say, well, what if I took away 1? Work that out. Now, this is starting to take a long time because we're starting to have to do 48 divided by 49. Oh, okay, right, let's work that out. Let's turn it into a percentage from a decimal. It could take you ages, absolutely ages to work out. Now, a couple of students might see 90% and go, oh, that's 9 in 1. And if you do, perfect, because there is your answer. But lots of students won't. So if they're starting to see something that there's really long, and it's going to take really long time, the things that come up in my brain are, I'm moving from 98% to 97.9. I am not moving very far. So I'm going to pick some bigger values in between. So let's try 40 balls left. Let's try 30 balls left, 20 balls left. Or I'm going, right, this is going to take a really, really long time. Let's just pick a value, any old value, like 15 red balls and 1 blue ball, and work it out and see whether I need to go up or need to go down. So remember, it's not about how many balls are in the bag. It's about how many should be removed. So again, they're trying to get you on that last little bit, that last little point. They're not asking for how many balls left in the bag. They're asking for how many should be removed. And they're trying to trick you on that. Okay. And then we've got this last one. This last one, a ball is dropped. It goes to 75% the height, then 75%, then 75%, 75%. I would start this question with the original height being 100, and then say, okay, well, after the first bounce, it's 75. The second bounce, I'm looking at 75% of 75, which is 56.25. Third bounce, I'm looking at 75% of 56.25. I'm starting to recognize that's taking time. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, actually, how many marks is this worth? If this is a multiple choice question, it's worth 1 mark. Is my time better spent checking? Is my time better spent somewhere else? Did I rush those first 3 questions? And actually, I could have got all 3 of those wrong. If they're worth the same as the last one, there's less point me spending the time on it. So timing is a really big thing. But we're not talking about just speeding up the individual. We're talking about where do you need to spend the most time. All right. Now, hopefully, going through that paper has been useful for you. In terms of kind of telling you what I do, as you may know, I run something called the Education Hotel. What we've got coming up next, we have some intensive boot camps. I'm talking all about them on the group. You'll be able to see them. This is the type of thing that we're going through. So looking over this exam technique. And in our 3-week boot camp, we do have mock exams that we'll be doing. We'll be recapping a little bit like this. If you have enjoyed this session, and again, whether you're looking at this live or whether you're looking at this on replay, can you please let me know in the comments, because I would really like to know in terms of if to do another one of these. Because if it is something that you found useful, if it's something that you've enjoyed, you found useful, let me know. And then I can put some time aside. If it's not, then hopefully there'll be something else that we'll be able to think of. But I know that when we get towards this time in terms of, we're hitting June, July, August, we start to hit summer, and it can be sometimes quite hard to find papers, to find worked papers. So hopefully this has helped a little bit. What I'll do is I'll also put the link down to the paper that I've just gone through, so that you can show it to your child, and you can make sure that they go through it as well. So again, as I said, thanks ever so much to Deep and to me to allowing me to come on. and to talk about this and to go through this type of paper. If you have any questions whatsoever, please do add them to the group. So private and grammar school information group. We love to answer your questions. All the admins do. We do keep an eye on everything that goes on in the group, and we do try and add as much help and as much support as we can. So that's it from me for today. And if anybody, if anybody has any other questions, do just stick them in the comments. I'd be happy to come back and answer them. So hopefully I will see you soon, and bye bye. Thank you.